So the devs asked the community, are you going to be able to make your own boss fight for Godforge? And that's what this whole video is going to be about. Yes, you heard correctly. We're going to answer the devs' call, and we're going to try and create our own boss fight that they could possibly integrate into Godforge. And I actually have a really interesting one, which is really fun too. That could be a weekly rotational boss that you can add into the game completely free of charge from me, MrSneakyy. All I ask for is maybe a podcast. Heads up, wink, wink. But with that, let's dive into today's video. And if you guys are watching this video and you have any boss ideas, put them in the comments down below, because honestly, Hell Hades, Susie, all of those guys will probably check the comments of this video and see if people are interested in creating some interesting boss fights for Godforge and if they can integrate it into the game. So what we're going to do is simply showcase a couple of different games to give you guys a little bit of an inspiration from maybe some nostalgia from the back in the day that you might have played, and you can understand what they want from you to kind of bring to the table. And with that, we'll dive into my suggestion right at the end. So with that, smash a like, comment, and subscribe, and let's dive into today's video. So the first one is honestly one game that I grew up with, and many of you guys should hopefully know the series of Final Fantasy. And I remember playing Final Fantasy X growing up on the PlayStation 2, and honestly, this game had one of the most iconic boss fights I can remember no matter what when I play this game, and that was the Sin boss battle fight. It's simple as that. It's when you as Tidus are fighting Sin on this giant ship in the water, and it is honestly just an incredible boss fight that, I'm going to be honest, took me weeks to complete because I was not prepared. I was not understanding what I needed to do and figure out the battle triggers. But this is honestly a prime example of how a turn-based game can honestly be so entertaining and honestly drive real stress to the player that if you don't complete this, it's going to end here. It's going to finish and you're going to have to restart and go again from this save file, because guess what? You're not progressing. It's as simple as that. And this was one of the harder milestones in the game for me, especially growing up. And it really does showcase everything that honestly is a base level of a turn-based combat system where you are taking each turn on each character, their special attacks, their power-ups, you name it, you summon, going against the boss to try and sleep it, use powerless, everything. It's got everything involved. So Final Fantasy as just a whole genre is a really good example of what the devs are kind of looking for, especially for a turn-based boss fight from maybe a game that you guys may want to draw inspiration. So that's my first one that you guys can look at. It's obviously an easy one, but the next one is probably going to throw a lot of you guys off guard. So the next one is Hearthstone, and one part of Hearthstone during one of the best expansions I honestly loved to play was the Puzzle Labs. And in the Puzzle Labs, they had basically an one turn-based game mode. Yes, you heard right. And in this turn-based game mode, you had to spot the lethal, which I honestly thought was a really interesting way that even in Godforge, they could integrate it into the game. And hear me out, because the concept of spot the lethal was simple. You got given a very specific board, and you had to figure out how you would kill your opponent on that turn. And this could be something you could introduce into Godforge. These could be, again, daily challenges where you are presented with a team with maybe certain skills active and certain ones are not, and then the boss, and you have to figure out how you are supposed to combo or take out a specific side, boss or a little objective on the side, right, in order to get through and actually kill that boss. And it's a really interesting way of introducing turn-based combat and, again, a card-based OTK. And it's a really interesting dynamic and showcasing. And look, you can spot inspiration, guys, from different games, and it doesn't have to be the obvious Final Fantasy in this case. And I'm usually just using obviously Hearthstone here as an example, but there's obviously a bunch more on that. And with that, we'll give you one more example, and an easy one that you should all understand from a definite turn-based combat. and it's Pokemon. I'm sorry, but yes, it's Pokemon. I don't care who you are, but growing up with the Pokemon Yellow, Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue, everyone played those games and it took over. And look at it today. It's a completely different game that is so much in depth because each Pokemon does have obviously a passive ability. It has its 4 moves that can be obviously changed depending on your team setup. And this creates a massive PvP dynamic, which honestly, again, Godforge is easily going to be able to replicate on its own terms, because again, each hero is going to have basically an ability with an ultimate and potentially some other stuff that you're going to be able to use, right? So really interesting how, again, we can take inspiration from something so simple as Pokemon and have basically this game as a direct correlation to Godforge. Because if you think about it, Godforge, you're collecting heroes to obviously fight and use in the world. In Pokemon, you're collecting Pokemon to gather in your team to, again, fight against enemies in the world and obviously capture more Pokemon. And it's as simple as that. And it's just showcasing, look, these games, even though they look completely different on paper, they actually do share similarities where you can draw inspiration. And if you have found any other games that you have played in the past, guys, that you enjoy and you think, do you know what, I could take this and turn it into a boss fight, put it in the comments down below, because that is exactly what I'm about to do in the next point. So my boss fight is going to be a weekly potential game mode that could be in Godforge, because it's going to be a really fun one, which allows players, no matter what, to have almost unlimited replayability. And yes, you heard that correctly. And it's a really hard, actually, objective to set for yourself, especially as just a typical gamer who's trying to think of something for other gamers to enjoy. And my boss fight is a really easy, I would say, cheat almost. It's a cheat code. I think even Hades is going to go, why did I think of that? It's as simple as this. Why not have a shapeshifter? Why not have this shapeshifter mimic? And this shapeshifter mimic, basically, each week will have a pool of 3 different iconic bosses or areas that you have to obviously fight in the game. And what happens is, turn 1, you fight the mimic and you have its health pool and it will go down as you're dealing damage. But then maybe on turn 2, turn 3, you're gonna see the mimic swap, and it's gonna swap into one of 3 of these different bosses in the game. And the reason I'm saying one of 3 is because during that stage, you're not gonna be able to deal any damage. And what you have to do is understand the mechanics to survive and actually basically delay the inevitable of you dying. Because once that timer is hit 0, it's going to change back to the mimic or the shapeshifter, and you can go back and deal some more damage to it. And what this allows the player is to actually think of a really flexible team now, because you might have a boss that might be immune to maybe stun effects, or maybe immune to, again, like silence effects. So you can't bring in your best in slot team if they have those 2 effects, because they're going to be basically rendered useless against that week's rotational bosses. And that's the cool thing about it. Every week, the shapeshifter can choose 3 different bosses. You guys can kind of program it to be random if you wanted to. I don't know how you want to do it, but every week or whenever this event comes up, the shapeshifter can obviously choose a different choice of bosses, and it allows the player to always change their team, always think of something on the fly, and it's not going to be generally a best in slot team. You really have to be able to approach and defeat almost 3 different bosses within one fight, and that's the best way of explaining it. So I think shapeshifter could be a really cool way of bringing a really dynamic and, again, flexible, customizable boss fight to Godforge with what the current theme is. And that is my suggestion as a boss fight. And if you guys like that idea, or maybe now you've got an understanding, a better understanding of what a boss fight could sound like, put it in the comments down below. Again, that's the whole point of today's video for this Godforge. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you have, smash a like, comment, and subscribe. And until the next one, guys, stay safe, stay sneaky. Peace out.